She grabbed the dress right out of Amara's hands. Not a gentle redirect, not a polite, let me help you. She snatched it, the way you snatch something from a child who picked up something they were never supposed to touch. And then she looked Amara up and down with that slow, deliberate cruelty that only truly practiced cruelty can manage. And she said it loud enough for half the boutique to hear, "Women like you don't wear dresses like this." And then, before Amara could even process what had just happened, the manager smiled. She actually smiled. If that had happened to you, right now, in front of strangers, in a place where you came to feel beautiful, what would you have done? Because Amara didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't walk out. She stood completely still, and she said 7 words that nobody in that boutique understood yet. "I would like to speak with the owner." They laughed at her for that. Every single one of them laughed. They had no idea those 7 words had just started a clock. And when it ran out, nothing about that boutique, those jobs, or those lives would ever be the same again. If you are watching this right now, and you have ever been made to feel like you don't belong somewhere, like your body, your skin, or your money wasn't the right kind, this story is for you. Stay with me until the very end, because what happens next is something none of us saw coming. And if you want to be part of this community, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment below telling me what city or country you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit the like button too. It means more than you know. Now let's go back to that boutique, because it's about to get very, very complicated. The morning Amara Brooks walked into Elise Fontaine Couture, she was not thinking about power. She was not thinking about her husband. She was not thinking about what her last name meant to half the people in this city who would cross a street to avoid it. She was thinking about her mother's 70th birthday and whether Ivory would wash her out under the banquet lighting. That was it. That was the whole scope of her morning. She had dropped her daughter at school, she had argued mildly with the dry cleaner about a blouse they had lost 2 weeks ago, and she had driven herself, alone, without the detail, because Darius had asked and she had said no, because she was 38 years old and she did not need 4 men in earpieces following her through a shopping mall to look at dresses. She had been doing ordinary things alone her entire life before she met him, and she refused to stop now. She found parking on the 2nd level. She checked her lipstick in the rearview mirror, decided it was fine, then decided it wasn't, then decided she was wasting time and got out of the car. The mall was the kind of place that smelled like money the moment you walked in. Not perfume exactly, something underneath it, something deliberately cold and polished, like the marble floors and the recessed lighting had been specifically designed to make you feel like your clothes weren't quite right. Amara had been inside places like this enough times to know the feeling without letting it mean anything. You felt it, you noted it, and then you kept walking. She was wearing a floral wrap dress she'd bought on clearance 18 months ago and never had occasion to wear. It was a good dress. She liked it. The colors were warm and the fabric moved right, and she had gotten a compliment at the school drop-off from another mother who had genuinely meant it, and that had put her in a good mood that was still gently humming somewhere behind her sternum as she pushed open the glass door of Elise Fontaine Couture and stepped inside. The humming stopped almost immediately. It didn't stop because of any one thing. It stopped the way music stops when someone cuts the power. Sudden, total, and oddly embarrassing, like the silence itself is pointing at you. The 2 women near the entry display didn't stop talking. They just let their voices drop low enough that Amara couldn't hear the words anymore. Only the shape of them, and the shape was not kind. One of them glanced over. The glance traveled from Amara's face to her dress, to her shoes, and back up again. And whatever it found was apparently enough to settle something, because the woman turned back to her colleague, and they continued their low, private conversation without interrupting it to greet the new customer. Amara had grown up in a family that talked about dignity the way other families talked about money. Her grandmother used to say that dignity was not about how other people treated you. It was about who you were in the moment they chose to treat you wrong. She had heard that sentence so many times as a child that it had lost all meaning, the way repeated words do, the way they go from language into sound. But she was thinking about it now, standing just inside the door of a boutique where 2 women had decided in under 4 seconds that she was not worth the energy of a hello. She kept walking. The boutique was long and narrow, with dresses displayed on individual stands like sculptures in a gallery, each one lit from above by a single focused spotlight. It was beautiful. Amara could admit that without resentment. It was genuinely, carefully, expensively beautiful. And whoever had designed the space had understood something real about the way light makes fabric come alive. She moved slowly because she actually wanted to look, not to prove anything, because she liked clothes. She had always liked clothes, even when she couldn't afford the ones she wanted, even when the ones she wanted were never cut for a body like hers. She had liked them anyway. She had liked the idea of them. She found the evening wear section near the back of the store, past the casual separates and the workwear, and a rack of silk blouses in colors that reminded her of the Pantone swatches her daughter liked to collect. The evening gowns were extraordinary. She stood in front of them for a moment, just taking them in. There was a midnight blue one with a structured bodice that she dismissed immediately. Wrong color for the venue, too dramatic for the occasion. There was a rose gold with beading on the shoulders that she liked more than she expected to, and a simple black crepe that she almost passed over and then didn't, because sometimes simple was right in a way that complicated could never be. And then she saw it. It was emerald green, deep and rich, the shade of green that exists somewhere between forest and jewel. Floor length, with a wrapped bodice and a side slit that was elegant rather than obvious. It was not a young woman's dress. It was a woman's dress. It was the kind of dress that understood what 40 years of living looked like and did not try to hide it. She reached out and touched the fabric. She was reaching for the tag. She wanted to see the size, wanted to see if there was any chance, when the hand appeared. Not her hand. A different hand. It came from her left, quick and purposeful, and it lifted the dress from the stand before Amara's fingers had fully closed, and for a half second she thought she had imagined it, thought some trick of the lighting had played with her depth perception, and then she looked up and there was a woman standing in front of her. Late 40s. Blonde hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face at the temples. A small gold name tag that said Vivienne, boutique manager, in letters. So fine you had to lean in to read them. "This piece isn't something we keep out for general browsing," Vivienne said. Her voice was pleasant in the way that some poisons are pleasant. No bitterness in the taste, just the effect. Amara looked at the dress in Vivienne's hands, then back at Vivienne's face. "I was looking at it." "I can see that." Vivienne smiled. It did not reach her eyes or attempt to. "But this particular gown requires a fitting consultation, and our consultants have a waiting list. If you'd like to leave your name—" "I don't need a consultation," Amara said. "I just want to see the size." Something moved through Vivienne's expression. Not quite irritation. Something more specific and more practiced than irritation. "I really think," she said, "that your time would be better spent in another section. We have some lovely daywear pieces near the front that would—" "I'm not looking for daywear." The air between them changed. Amara felt it the way you feel pressure drop before weather rolls in. Nothing you can point to, just a shift in the quality of things. Vivienne took a breath. She stepped slightly closer, and when she spoke again, her voice was low enough that it was clearly meant to be private, an intimacy that was actually the opposite of intimate. "I'm going to be direct with you, because I think it's kinder than letting this go on. This boutique caters to a very specific clientele. The price points are significant. The cuts are designed for—" And here she paused, and the pause was its own sentence. "A particular silhouette. I'm trying to save you from an uncomfortable experience." Amara said nothing for 3 full seconds. She was doing the math her grandmother had taught her. Not the math of pride, not the math of what she could prove, but the math of what she actually wanted, and whether this woman had the power to take it. "What's the price on that dress?" Amara asked. "That's not really the— What's the price?" Vivienne's pleasantness slipped exactly 1 notch. $4,200. Amara nodded slowly. "And you're telling me I can't buy it? I'm telling you it may not be the best fit for a— For what?" The word landed like a small stone in still water. Vivienne felt the ripples. She opened her mouth, and then she made a mistake that people like Vivienne make when they have gone too long being agreed with. She stopped performing politeness. "Look," she said, and her voice took on something harder and more honest than anything she'd said so far. "This dress was designed for a specific kind of woman. I'm not going to apologize for that. Not every store carries every size for a reason. Some silhouettes only work on certain frames. And—" she glanced briefly but unmistakably at Amara's face. "Our clientele has certain expectations about the environment they're shopping in. I think you understand me." Amara understood her perfectly. The sick part, the part she would not admit to anyone except maybe Darius later, in the dark quiet of their kitchen when the house had gone to sleep, was how familiar the feeling was. Not the specific cruelty of this woman in this boutique, but the older, deeper thing underneath it. The feeling of being seen as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be spoken to. She had carried that feeling across thresholds her whole life. She had been carrying it since she was 7 years old, and a department store security guard had followed her and her mother through 3 floors, as if something about them, their clothes, their skin, their very specific gravity, automatically qualified them as a risk. She took the feeling and she put it exactly where her grandmother had taught her to put it. She looked at Vivian with absolute steadiness and she said, "I would like to speak with the owner." And that was when Vivian laughed. Not a sharp laugh, not a mean one, a dismissive one, which was somehow worse, because dismissal contains a verdict and cruelty only contains intent. Vivian laughed and turned her head slightly and caught the eye of one of the sales associates hovering nearby. And that woman laughed too. And then a third woman near the register made a sound that was cousin to a laugh, and suddenly Amara was standing inside a performance she had not auditioned for and could not exit without someone deciding the story for her. "The owner is unavailable," Vivian said, recovering herself with the ease of someone who had done this before. "And frankly, I think we've both spent enough time on this. Let me help you find the exit." "I know where the exit is." "Then I would encourage you to use it." Somewhere behind Amara, she heard the quiet hiss of a phone camera. Someone was recording. She didn't turn around to look. If she turned around to look, it meant she cared who was watching, and she had decided, in the space of the last 30 seconds, that she did not. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Amara said, and something in her voice was different now. Not louder, not harder, just more precise, like a key turning. "To let me speak with whoever owns this building." Vivian looked at her for a moment with something approaching curiosity, as if she were wondering why this woman wouldn't simply leave, why she was insisting on a conversation that had already been decided, why she kept standing there in her clearance floral dress, with her natural hair and her ordinary shoes and her deeply inconvenient refusal to disappear. "Security!" Vivian called. Not urgently, casually, as if she were asking for a glass of water. "Could someone come to the evening wear section?" The 2 people who materialized were young men in blazers, who looked genuinely uncomfortable in a way that suggested they had some inkling that what was happening was wrong, but had not yet developed the tools or the job security to act on that inkling. "This woman," Vivian said to them, without looking at Amara, "needs to be escorted out." Amara looked at the 2 young men. One of them, the one on the left, mid-20s, with a small scar on his chin and eyes that were doing something complicated, looked back at her. Something passed between them. Something wordless. She looked at Vivian. "You have my name," Amara said quietly. "When the owner contacts me, and they will, please make sure they know exactly what happened in this room today. Every word, every word." Vivian's smile did not move. "Of course," she said, with the smooth certainty of someone who has never once been held accountable for anything. What happened in the next 6 minutes was not what any of them expected. The young security guard on the left, the one with the scar, whose name was Marcus, though no one in this story would think to ask it, stepped aside and let Amara walk past him unescorted. He would pay for that small act later, when Vivian noticed and wrote it in his file. He made it anyway. Amara walked to the center of the boutique. She sat down in one of the velvet chairs near the fitting room corridor, crossed her hands in her lap, and she waited. She didn't take out her phone. She didn't look at anything in particular. She just sat with the stillness of someone who had decided that the only move left was patience, and patience did not require an audience. Vivian watched her from across the floor. "Ma'am, I need you to leave." "I'm waiting to speak with the owner." "I told you. I heard what you told me." Vivian crossed the floor in 7 efficient steps. She stood in front of Amara's chair, close enough that it was clearly meant to feel threatening, and she looked down and she made the mistake that would define the next several weeks of her life. She looked at this woman, this patient, quiet, clearance dress-wearing woman sitting with her hands in her lap, and she said the thing she had been building towards since Amara walked through the door, the thing she had been wrapping in polite language and practiced deflection, the thing that was always the truth underneath everything else. "A fat black woman in a bargain dress does not belong in my boutique. and nothing you say or do is going to change that. Now get out of my store before I have you removed." The boutique went very quiet. Amara looked up at her. Her face did not change. Not one muscle moved. And then she said, very calmly, very quietly, "I need to make a phone call." She took out her phone. She called the one number she had promised herself on a Tuesday morning 8 months ago when Darius had asked her to promise it, that she would always call when things went wrong. It rang twice. He picked up on the second ring, the way he always did when it was her, because he had told her once, early in their marriage, when neither of them was sure yet how it would all work, that the sound of her ringtone was the only thing in the world that could genuinely stop him mid-sentence. "Hey," he said, the way he said it, like exhaling. Amara looked at Vivian, who was still standing over her chair with that cold, satisfied smile. "I'm at Elise Fontaine Couture," Amara said, "on 5th and Mercer." A pause. Short, precise. "You okay?" She thought about the emerald dress. She thought about her mother's 70th birthday and ivory versus green and the question of banquet lighting. She thought about Marcus with his scar and his sideways courage stepping out of her path. "I will be," she said. She ended the call. She set the phone in her lap, and she sat in that velvet chair in the middle of that beautiful, cold, deliberately ungenerous boutique, and she waited for the next thing to happen. She did not have to wait very long. Nobody moved. That was the first thing Amara noticed after she ended the call and set the phone back in her lap. The boutique had not emptied. The customers who had been drifting between the displays, the women with their shopping bags and their quiet conversations, the couple near the silk blouses arguing in low voices about whether a birthday gift needed to be practical, none of them had left. They had all, in some unspoken collective understanding, decided to stay. Not because they planned to help, because they wanted to see what happened next. Human beings are like that, even the decent ones. Vivian noticed it too, and she did not like it. "All right," she said, raising her voice just enough to fill the room without actually shouting. "I'm going to ask everyone to continue shopping. There's nothing happening here that requires an audience." She said the last word with a particular sharpness, as if the audience itself were the problem, rather than the thing the audience had gathered to watch. Nobody moved. A woman near the window, silver-haired, maybe 65, wearing a camel coat that had not come off a clearance rack, looked directly at Vivian with an expression that was not hostile exactly, but was not nothing either. She looked at her the way you look at someone you've mentally filed away for later. Vivian felt it. She was practiced enough to feel things like that and bury them immediately, but Amara, who had been watching people manage their expressions her entire life, saw the quarter second where it registered. Then it was gone, and Vivian's face was smooth and certain again. "Monique." She turned toward the nearest sales associate without raising her voice. The associate, a young woman, maybe 23, pretty in a studied way that suggested considerable effort, came forward. "Pull the Cardenas account from the back. I need to make a call." It was a performance of normalcy, a demonstration that whatever was happening in the velvet chair near the fitting rooms was not enough to interrupt the actual business of the boutique. Monique nodded and disappeared, and Vivienne pulled out her own phone and walked 4 steps away from Amara and stood with her back half turned, like Amara was furniture. Amara watched her. She was not angry, exactly. Or she was angry in a way that had nowhere obvious to go, and she had learned, a long time before she met Darius, that anger with nowhere to go does more damage to the person holding it than to anything else. So she held it differently. She put it in her chest and let it stay there, and she breathed around it, and she waited. The boutique made small sounds, the quiet hum of the climate system, the soft percussion of hangers moving. Somewhere behind her, 2 women were talking in voices deliberately kept low, and she could make out fragments. Said the same thing to her, "Did you hear? Who does she think?" And she understood that she was the subject of those fragments, and she let that be true without letting it become the center of anything. Marcus, the security guard with the scar, had positioned himself near the door, not blocking it, just near it. She watched him peripherally. He had his hands clasped in front of him, and he was looking at a fixed point near the ceiling, and his jaw was doing something that suggested he was thinking hard about something he had not yet decided. It had been 4 minutes since the phone call. Vivian finished her performance call. Amara was fairly certain it was a performance call because no one makes actual business calls standing 6 feet from a situation they're trying to pretend doesn't exist. And she walked back toward the velvet chair. "Last chance," she said, quietly, somehow more serious now than before, as if she had used the phone call to reset herself into something colder. "I don't want to make this more unpleasant than it needs to be." Amara looked up at her. "How unpleasant does it need to be?" "That depends entirely on you." "Then I'd say not at all," Amara said, "because I'm not leaving." Vivian breathed in through her nose. "You understand that I can have you physically removed." "I understand that." "And you're still—" "I'm still sitting here, yes." A sound from somewhere near the entrance. Not a dramatic sound, just the particular quality of silence that arrives when a door opens and people who were looking one direction suddenly look another. Vivian heard it and did not turn immediately, because turning immediately would suggest she was waiting for something, and she was not going to give this woman in the velvet chair the satisfaction of seeing her wait for anything. But then Monique made a sound. A very small sound, not quite a word. More like a word had started and thought better of itself halfway through. Vivian turned. The man who had just walked through the door of Elise Fontaine Couture was not a large man in the way that term is usually meant. He was not built like intimidation performed by someone who needed to perform it. He was maybe 6'1", lean, with the particular stillness of someone who had trained himself, over many years and through considerable difficulty, not to fill spaces with unnecessary movement. He was wearing a black suit that had clearly been made specifically for his body, and a white shirt open at the collar, and his hands were in his jacket pockets, and the tattoos that covered his neck and ran down the backs of both hands were the only outwardly dramatic thing about him. His face was not dramatic. His face was just completely, utterly calm. The way a room is calm before someone remembers to be afraid of it. He did not look at Vivian. He did not look at the customers frozen in various poses of interrupted shopping, or at Marcus by the door, or at any of the sales associates who had simultaneously found reasons to stop what they were doing and become very still. He walked directly toward the velvet chair near the fitting rooms, as if every other person in the boutique were furniture, and he crouched down in front of it so that his face was level with Amara's. And he looked at her the way people look at someone they have been looking at, specifically, for 15 years. "Hey," he said softly. Amara let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding since she walked through the boutique door. "Hey," she said back. His eyes moved over her face, reading it the way you read something you have memorized, but check anyway, because the thing is too important to leave to memory alone. He saw what he was looking for, the controlled steadiness she wore like armor. The controlled steadiness that meant something underneath it was bruised, and his jaw tightened once, briefly, and then released. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him for a moment. "I will be." He nodded. He stood up slowly and turned around, and for the first time since he walked in, he looked at the room. Nobody spoke. That was the particular thing about Darius Kane in a room. Not that people were afraid of him specifically in that moment, but that something in the architecture of his attention, the way he let it move across a space like a slow light, made people understand that speaking without being addressed was probably a mistake. Whether they knew who he was or simply responded to something older and more animal in his bearing, the effect was the same. Silence. Vivian broke it. Because Vivian was the kind of person who had confused her own authority with actual authority for so long that she didn't have the instincts left to read a room correctly. "Sir," she said, stepping forward with the pleasant, practiced voice of someone managing an inconvenience, "I'm going to have to ask you to— Who's in charge of this store?" His voice was even, not loud, not threatening in tone, just completely clear, the way water is clear when it's very deep. Vivian stopped walking. "I'm the manager, Vivian Hartwell." "Were you here?" he said, "when my wife came in?" A half second. Not long, long enough. "You're—" Vivian stopped. She looked at Amara still in the velvet chair. She looked at Darius. She reassembled something in her expression very quickly. "I'm sorry, I wasn't aware that—" "I didn't ask if you were aware of anything," he said. "I asked if you were here." "Yes," she said. "Yes, I was here." "Good," he said. And then he turned to Marcus, the security guard by the door, and he said, lock the front door. Marcus looked at him. He looked at Vivian. He looked at the door. Excuse me, Vivian said. Her voice was still even, but it had lost something, some foundational quality, and the absence of that quality was very apparent in a room this quiet. Nobody leaves, Darius said. I was not looking at Vivian. He was looking at Marcus. Not until I know exactly what happened in here today. Marcus unlocked the security panel beside the entrance and lowered the front gate. It descended slowly, and every person in the boutique watched it descend, and the sound it made was the sound of a situation becoming very different from what it was 5 minutes ago. Vivian spun toward Darius. You cannot do that. This is a private establishment, and you have absolutely no right. Call the police, Darius said simply, if you think that helps your situation. She stopped. And there it was. The tell. The thing that told him, and told Amara, and told everyone in the room who was paying attention, that Vivian Hartwell understood something about this situation that she had not understood 60 seconds ago. She did not move for her phone. She did not tell any of her staff to call anyone. She stood in the middle of her boutique with its beautiful lighting and its extraordinary dresses and its emptied velvet stands, and she did the calculations, and the calculations did not come out in her favor. Who are you? She asked. It came out smaller than she intended. That's a longer conversation, Darius said. We'll get there. He turned and looked at the customers gathered in their various frozen postures of witness. He addressed them the same way he'd addressed everyone else. Directly, without apology, without performance. I'm not here for any of you. You'll be free to go in a few minutes. But right now I need you all to stay where you are and tell me honestly what you saw when this woman walked into this store. The silver-haired woman in the camel coat, the one who had looked at Vivian with that filed-away expression, let out a breath and stepped forward. I saw everything, she said. Vivian turned her head sharply. Diana. Don't, the woman said, and there was 65 years of having no patience for this particular type of thing compressed into that one word. Darius looked at her. What's your name? Diana Marsh. I've been a customer of this boutique for 11 years. She paused. Was a customer. What did you see? Diana Marsh looked at Amara and then back at Darius, and she told him. She told him clearly and chronologically, the way people who have been waiting for someone to ask the right question. Tell things, and she did not soften it, and she did not editorialize beyond what was accurate. And by the time she finished, the room was so quiet that the climate system felt loud. Monique, the young associate, was looking at her shoes. Two of the other staff members had moved unconsciously closer to the wall, as if proximity to a solid structure improved the situation. Vivian said nothing. Her arms were crossed across her chest, and she was looking at a point 6 inches above and to the left of Darius Kane's head, and her face was doing the work of someone who has decided the best remaining strategy is to look unmoved. Anything you want to add? Darius asked her. I'd like to speak with a lawyer. You can do that, he said. After. After what? He didn't answer immediately. He turned back to Amara, who had stood up from the velvet chair and was now standing with her hands at her sides, watching him with an expression that was tired and careful and something else underneath that he knew the name of, and she would not want named in a room full of strangers. The dress, he said to her quietly. The green one. Is it still here? She looked around. The emerald dress, the one Vivian had taken from the stand before Amara's fingers could close around it, was hanging behind the manager's desk on a hook near the back wall. It had been put there deliberately, Amara understood now. Put there so she could see it and not have it. That kind of cruelty was very specific. It required thought. It's on the wall, she said. He looked where she indicated. He crossed the floor, past Vivian, past Monique, past the woman who had been recording on her phone and now held it down against her thigh in a way that suggested she was still recording but hoped no one would notice. He took the dress from the hook. He brought it back to Amara and held it out. She looked at it. She didn't take it yet. Darius, take the dress, Amara. I know you don't need it. He kept holding it out. Take it. She took it. She held it in both arms, the emerald fabric pooling slightly against her forearms, and she looked at it, and she did not cry, because she had not cried in this boutique and she was not going to start. But there was something in her face that was very close to the edge of something. Vivian found her voice. It was smaller than before, but it was still hers, still wrapped in the conviction of someone who has spent a very long time being right. You cannot take merchandise without paying for it, and none of this, she gestured at the room, at Darius, at the locked gate. None of this is legal. Whatever you think you're doing, I'm going to tell you what I'm doing, Darius said. He was still looking at Amara, at the dress in her arms. When he finally turned to face Vivian, his expression had not changed. That was the thing that made it worse somehow. There was no anger in his face. Anger meant you still cared what the other person thought of you. His face contained something past that. I'm going to need every security recording from this store for the past 4 hours. You have absolutely no authority. I own this building, he said. The room changed, not gradually, immediately. Vivian's mouth opened, closed. Her arms dropped from across her chest. I'm sorry, she said. This building was purchased 8 months ago by Meridian Property Holdings, which is mine. He said it the way you state weather. The same evenness, the same lack of investment in how it landed. Your lease runs through the end of next quarter. I'll have my people forward you the relevant documents. He turned to the young man near the door who had entered quietly behind him. Impeccably dressed, carrying nothing, the specific kind of invisible that very competent people can choose to be. Call the property office. I want a lease review on my desk tonight. The young man nodded and stepped aside to make a call. Vivian stood very still. The blood had left the surface of her face in a way that was almost medical to observe. The security footage, Darius continued, turning back to her. I'll take it now. You can have your lawyer present for that conversation if you'd like, but the footage belongs to the building, which means it belongs to me. Vivian stopped, started again. You can't just, this is, Vivian. He said her name without heat. You stood in front of my wife. You looked at her and you told her that she didn't belong in a place you operate on land you don't own, and you told her that because of what she looked like. You did that in front of witnesses and in front of cameras that I own. He let that settle for exactly the amount of time it needed to settle. Now I'm asking you for the footage. Once. The second sales associate, the one who had not been recorded, who had only laughed, who had probably told herself it wasn't that bad, started crying. Not dramatically, just the involuntary kind, the kind that arrives when the body finally gets the information the brain has been refusing to process. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and turned away. Monique was still looking at her shoes. Marcus, by the door, had his arms crossed and his eyes on the floor, and his expression was doing the complicated thing it had been doing since Amara first walked in, except now the thing it had been building toward had arrived, and he looked less complicated and more simply, quietly sick. Diana Marsh sat down in one of the boutique chairs, not the velvet one Amara had been sitting in, a different one near the display of evening bags. And she sat with the particular straight spine of someone from a generation that didn't slump, and she watched, and she did not say anything more. Vivian looked around the room. She looked at her staff. She looked at the customers. She looked at the locked gate, and the young man on the phone in the corner and the dress in Amara's arms. She looked at Darius Kane's face, and she understood something, clearly and completely, and several weeks too late. She walked to the back office. She came out 2 minutes later carrying a hard drive. She set it on the nearest display counter without speaking. Darius's associate crossed the room, picked it up, and pocketed it. One more thing, Darius said. Vivian looked up. The words you used, he said. The specific words. I want you to say them again. In front of these people. The silence became a different kind of silence. I don't, Vivian started. You said something to my wife about what she looked like, about the specific way she looked. I want the room to hear you say it again. I'm not going to, then someone else will say it for you. He looked at Diana Marsh. Diana Marsh did not hesitate. She repeated it word for word, and her voice did not waver, and she looked at Vivian the whole time she said it. Vivian's face went from pale to something past pale. The young woman who had been recording on her phone was openly recording now. She wasn't hiding it anymore. She held the phone up and she recorded Diana Marsh saying the words, and she recorded Vivian's face hearing them repeated back to her in front of a locked room full of witnesses, and one very still man in a black suit who had stopped being a husband for the last 10 minutes and was being something else entirely. Amara looked at Vivian. Vivian could not look back. There was something about that, about the specific direction of that avoidance, about the fact that Vivian Hartwell, who had looked at her with so much effortless certainty not 40 minutes ago, could not now hold her gaze. That was not satisfying exactly. Satisfaction implied that this had been a contest, and Amara had not come here for a contest. She had come here for a dress. She had come for something simple and ordinary and human, and something simple and ordinary and human had been turned into this. Into a locked boutique and a hard drive on a display counter, and a woman who couldn't look at her. Her arms tightened slightly around the emerald dress. Darius came and stood beside her, not in front of her, not behind her. Beside her, in the way that meant equal rather than protective, the way that he had always understood that she did not need protecting so much as she needed someone who would stand in the same place she was standing and refuse to move. "We're going to go," he said to the room, not to Vivian, to everyone. "The gate will open in a moment. Those of you who saw what happened today, thank you for staying." His eyes moved to the woman with the phone. "You'll want to keep that footage somewhere safe." The woman nodded. He looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him with that complicated expression, and Darius said nothing to him, just held his gaze for a moment, and then nodded, the smallest possible nod, and Marcus understood something from it that he would think about for a long time after. The gate opened. Vivian stood in the center of her boutique. Her staff around her were doing the various small things people do when they are trying to figure out whether the crisis has passed or only changed shape. The dresses on their stands were still lit by their individual spotlights. The marble floors were still cold. Everything that had been beautiful about the boutique an hour ago was still technically present, but it had become one of those things that looks right and feels completely wrong, like a smile that doesn't use the eyes. Amara walked out with the dress in her arms. Darius walked beside her. Behind them, Vivienne finally found something to say. Her voice was not steady, but it was loud. "This isn't over," she said. "You can't just come in here and you have no idea what kind of people you're dealing with, and this is not how business works, and my lawyers will—" Darius stopped walking. He did not turn around immediately. When he did, he turned slowly, and he looked at Vivian Hartwell across the width of the boutique, across the beautiful floor and the individual spotlights and the $4,200 dresses on their gallery stands, and his expression was the same as it had been since he walked in. Completely, utterly, dangerously even. "Make those calls," he said, and then he turned back around, and he and Amara walked through the gate and into the corridor of the mall and away. Vivian stood in the silence they left behind, and the silence was the kind that had weight, the kind that presses. Her phone was in her hand and she was staring at it, and the calls she had said she would make suddenly felt very different than they had felt 40 seconds ago, because making those calls required knowing things, and there were things she was beginning to understand that she had not known when this morning started. She looked at Monique. Monique looked back at her with young eyes that had seen too much in the last half hour and had not finished processing it. "Who was that?" Monique asked, quietly, like she was asking herself more than Vivian. Vivian set her phone down on the counter next to where the hard drive used to be. "I don't know," she said, but she was starting to. And that was the worst part. Not the locked gate, not the footage, not the building, not any of the external facts that had rearranged themselves around her in the last 30 minutes. The worst part was that she could feel the shape of what she didn't know, the specific contours of it, like feeling for something in the dark, and understanding from the shape alone that you do not want to find it. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. The call was from the boutique's parent company headquarters, which had never called this location directly in the 11 years she had managed it. She stared at the incoming call for 3 full seconds before she answered. "Vivienne," said the voice on the other end, and it was her regional director, and he sounded like a man who had just been told something and had not yet finished being afraid of it. "I need you to not do anything. Whatever has happened in the last hour, I need you to stop and sit down and wait. Do you understand me? Do not make any calls. Do not issue any statements. Do not— Vivian, are you listening?" She was listening. Outside, in the corridor of the mall, she could hear the distant sound of more vehicles arriving. She could not see the parking structure from where she stood, but she had a feeling, specific and cold, that if she walked to the window and looked out, what she would see would not reassure her. "Yes," she said. "I'm listening." "Good," her regional director said. And then he said the name. And when Vivian Hartwell heard the name, she sat down on the floor of her boutique among the beautiful things she had managed for 11 years, and she did not get up for a very long time. Vivian was still on the floor when they came for her files. Not the police, not lawyers. Two men in gray suits who arrived without announcing themselves and who moved through the boutique with the particular efficiency of people who have done this specific thing many times before in many different places, and who have long since stopped registering the emotional weather of the rooms they walk into. They did not look at Vivian sitting on the marble floor with her phone in her lap. They did not look at Monique, who had started crying again in the small office behind the register. They went directly to the filing cabinet beside the manager's desk, and one of them produced a key, and Vivian stared at that key for a long moment before understanding arrived and settled over her like something very cold and very heavy. They had a key to her filing cabinet. Her filing cabinet in her boutique, in a building she had managed for 11 years. "Those are my personnel files," she said. Her voice was still on the floor with the rest of her, not quite making it all the way up to the room. "You can't just—" "Ma'am," one of the gray suits said, without looking at her, "these files belong to the building." "Personnel files don't belong to the building. They belong to—" "Ma'am." That was all he said. Just the one word, twice. And something in the way he said it, not threatening, not unkind, just completely final, the way a door sounds when it locks from the outside, made Vivian close her mouth. She watched them take the files. She watched them take everything from the cabinet, and the cabinet beside it, and the small locked box on the top shelf that contained the lease agreement she had signed 11 years ago, and the performance reviews she had written for her staff and 2 years' worth of correspondence with the parent company. They put it all into flat gray boxes that they had brought with them, and they stacked the boxes near the door, and then one of them took out a phone and made a brief call, and within 4 minutes there were two more people. A man and a woman, both young, both wearing the same quiet gray, who came and carried the boxes out. Monique appeared in the office doorway. Her mascara had done something complicated under her eyes. She looked at Vivian on the floor, and then at the empty filing cabinet, and then back at Vivian. "Vivian," she said, "what's happening?" Vivian looked up at her. She had been asking herself the same question for the last 20 minutes, and the answer kept arriving in pieces rather than whole. The way bad news tends to arrive, each piece worse than the last, and none of them quite adding up to a picture she could hold steady. "Call your union rep," Vivian said. Monique stared at her. "I'm not in a union." "Then call a lawyer." "Vivian." "Monique." She finally pushed herself up from the floor, using the display counter to get there, which was not graceful, and she did not care. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not talk to anyone who comes in here asking questions about today. Not anyone from the company, not anyone in a suit, not anyone who says they're building management. Do you understand me?" Monique's eyes were wide and wet. What did we do? The question hit Vivian somewhere between the sternum and the throat. She noticed it and moved past it. "Get your things," she said. "Get your personal belongings. Don't take anything that belongs to the store." Are we being— "Get your things, Monique." Monique disappeared back into the office, and Vivian stood alone in the boutique among the extraordinary dresses in their spotlights, and she took stock. This was a skill she had developed over 11 years of management, the ability to look at a situation clearly, without sentiment, and identify what could still be saved. It was the skill that had made her good at her job. She applied it now and came up empty. Outside the gate, which the gray suits had raised when they left and not lowered again, the mall was doing what malls do, people moving, sound echoing off high ceilings, the ordinary commerce of an ordinary afternoon. A woman walked past with a stroller. Two teenagers stopped to look at something on a shared phone screen. A man in a brown jacket sat on a bench near the fountain eating a pretzel and looking at nothing. And parked outside the main mall entrance, visible through the corridor's far glass wall, were 4 black SUVs, not parked in the designated spaces. Parked in the fire lane, with their engines off and their occupants making no particular effort to be inconspicuous. Just present, just there, the way a fact is there. Vivian counted the SUVs. Then she took out her phone and called her regional director back. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he had been waiting for her call, which meant the last 20 minutes had been as bad for him as they had been for her. "How much do you know?" she asked. No preamble. She was past preamble. "Vivian, How much do you know about who owns this building? A pause. The kind of pause that contains information. We were notified this morning that Meridian Property Holdings had acquired the Hargrove portfolio, which includes the Elise Fontaine Couture lease. That acquisition was finalized 8 months ago. We should have been informed at the time of sale, but apparently there was a communication breakdown on the administrative side. A communication breakdown, she repeated. The situation it's complicated. Meridian is not a public company. Its ownership structure is... He stopped. Started again. Vivian, I need you to understand that when I tell you what I'm about to tell you, it is not information I'm sharing lightly, and it is not information I want repeated. Tell me. Darius Kane. She already knew. She had known since she heard the name from his mouth 20 minutes ago on the marble floor. But hearing it from her regional director's voice, in his careful, frightened tone, made it real in a way that her own knowledge hadn't. How much of the portfolio? She asked. We're still determining the full scope, but initial assessments suggest Meridian controls 14 properties in this city alone. Several of them are, He paused again. Several of them are properties where our other boutique locations operate. The air went out of the room. Vivian set her hand flat on the display counter because she needed something solid. He owns our other locations. Not all of them, but enough that the parent company is... We're in discussions at the executive level right now about what the appropriate response is. The appropriate response, Vivian said, and she could hear in her own voice something that might have been a laugh if it had found a different direction, is that a woman was publicly humiliated in one of our stores today based on her appearance and her race. And the man whose building we operate out of happens to be that woman's husband. And now you're telling me that we potentially lease property from this man in multiple locations. Silence. That is an accurate summary, her director said quietly. How long have we known about the acquisition? Another pause, longer this time. 8 months, he said. Vivian took the phone from her ear and looked at it, not at anything specific on the screen, just at the object itself. Then she put it back. 8 months, she repeated. You've known for 8 months that our lease was held by... We didn't know who was behind Meridian at that point. The company is structured through several layers of holding entities. The connection to Kane wasn't publicly clear. But it's clear now. It became clear approximately 40 minutes ago when his legal team contacted our executive office. His legal team, she said. Not him. No, not him. She understood what that meant. When a man of Darius Kane's particular kind of power sent his legal team rather than coming himself, it was not because the matter was beneath him. It was because the legal team was sufficient, because the problem had already been solved at a level she was not privy to, and the legal team was simply delivering the documentation of a conclusion that had already been reached. What did they say? She asked. The lease is being terminated, effective 30 days from today, per the terms of the default clause, which was triggered by... He stopped. She could hear him looking at something, paper or screen, probably paper. People reached for paper when they wanted something to be real. The default clause was triggered by conduct on the premises constituting discrimination based on race and physical appearance, which is in violation of the non-discrimination covenant attached to the lease agreement. There's a non-discrimination covenant in the lease? There is in every Meridian lease, apparently. It's standard language in all their property agreements. We should have caught it during the acquisition review. We didn't. Vivian closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw Amara Brooks walking into the boutique this morning in her floral dress, reaching for the green gown, and she saw her own hand moving, and she heard her own voice saying things that had felt, at the time, so entirely reasonable, so entirely within the scope of her authority, so entirely unremarkable. What about the staff? She asked. That's a separate conversation. Separate how? Her director breathed. There's a lawsuit coming, Vivian. The initial filing is being drafted now. The footage from the building security cameras, which, as you now understand, belong to the building owner, shows the full incident. There are also multiple witness accounts, and at least one video recording from a customer's phone that is, as of about 15 minutes ago, publicly circulating. She opened her eyes. Publicly circulating, she said. It has... Yes, it's already been shared significantly. The comments are... He stopped again. He had a habit of stopping when the next word was one he didn't want to say. It's been shared significantly. Vivian turned and looked at her phone screen. She had not opened any social media in the last 30 minutes. She opened it now. She watched the video for 45 seconds, and then she stopped watching it. She had seen enough. She was in the video, not at the edge of it, centered in it. Her voice was clear. Her words were clear. Her face was clear and lit by the excellent boutique lighting that she had personally selected and arranged. And she looked at her own face in the video, and she looked like someone she did not recognize, and also, somehow, like someone she had always known. She set the phone face down on the counter. Her director was still talking. She heard pieces: legal representation, corporate protocol, media inquiries, the phrase HR will need to be involved, the phrase cooperate fully, the phrase this is beyond my capacity to resolve at the regional level and has been escalated. She heard all of it the way you hear things when you are listening from the inside of something that is collapsing. Am I being terminated? She asked, cutting through it. A pause that was its own answer. There will be a formal process, her director said. But the parent company's position is that, yes, Vivian, you are. She ended the call. She stood in the boutique for a long moment. The lights were still on. The dresses were still in their spotlights. The gate was up, and the mall was visible through the opening, and everything looked exactly as it had looked this morning when she arrived and unlocked the door and turned the lights on and put the coffee on and thought about the day ahead with the mild, settled confidence of someone who has done something long enough to stop thinking carefully about it. Monique came out of the office with her bag over her shoulder and a small plant she kept on the windowsill in her arms, a succulent in a terracotta pot. She had bought it 2 years ago from a street market, and it had lived on that windowsill through 2 rounds of layoffs and 1 flood in the lower level and various ordinary catastrophes of retail life. She held it like it was something that mattered, because it was. She looked at Vivian. The others went out the back, she said. They didn't want to walk past the cars out front. Vivian nodded. Are you going to be okay? Monique asked. The question was genuine. That was the thing about Monique that Vivian had always taken for granted. The genuine quality of her, the way she asked things because she actually wanted to know the answer. Vivian had managed her for 3 years, and in those 3 years she had occasionally recognized this quality and then filed it away without acting on it, because there were always more urgent things. I'll be fine, Vivian said. Monique nodded slowly. She shifted the succulent to her other arm. She walked to the gate and then she stopped and turned back. Vivienne, she said, I have to tell you something. Vivienne looked at her. I knew, Monique said. When she walked in, I knew what you were going to do. I could see it in the way you were watching her, and I didn't... She stopped, took a breath. I didn't say anything. Monique, I laughed, she said. When you said the thing about the dress, I laughed. She looked at the succulent in her arms. I've been thinking about that for the last 2 hours, and I can't. I don't have an excuse for it. I just wanted you to know that I know. Vivian looked at this young woman with her plant and her mascara and her 3 years of careful, genuine competence, and she understood that Monique was not looking for forgiveness and was not offering absolution and was not doing anything except saying a true thing out loud because she had decided that was what she needed to do. Vivian understood this more than she wanted to. Go home, she said quietly. Monique went. Vivian stood alone. Then she picked up her bag. She walked to the gate. She looked back once at the boutique, the lights, the dresses, 11 years of her own careful curation of this space, this particular quality of beauty that she had tended like something living. And then she walked out, and she did not look back again. The corridor outside was ordinary, people moving, sound echoing, a woman with a stroller. The man in the brown jacket was still on the bench by the fountain. He was still eating his pretzel. He was also, she noticed now as she passed, watching her. She stopped. He didn't look away, didn't adjust his posture or redirect his attention to the pretzel or the phone or anything else. He just looked at her with the patient, neutral regard of someone doing a job. She walked faster. She took the elevator to the parking level and walked to her car and put her bag in the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel and looked at her hands on the steering wheel for a moment. Her hands looked like her hands. They looked ordinary. That was somehow the strangest thing. She started the car. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She stared at it for 3 rings. Then she answered. Ms. Hartwell, said a voice she didn't recognize. Male, middle-aged, unhurried. My name is Frank DeLuca. I'm an attorney representing Meridian Property Holdings. I'm calling as a courtesy to inform you that as of close of business today, you will be receiving formal correspondence regarding the lawsuit. I've already spoken with my company's regional director, she said. Yes, the attorney said. This call is not about the corporate action. This is a separate matter. She paused. Separate how? The lawsuit being filed is not solely a corporate matter, Ms. Hartwell. Given the nature of the documented conduct, the specific language used, the deliberate discrimination based on race and physical appearance, the public nature of the incident, and the additional conduct visible on footage that you have not yet reviewed, my client is filing an individual complaint against you personally, in addition to the corporate complaint. The steering wheel was very solid under her hands. Personally, she said, personally. She looked through the windshield at the concrete of the parking structure, at the lines painted on the ground, at the ordinary geometry of a parking level on an ordinary afternoon. What footage? She said. I know about the phone video. I know about the... There is additional footage from the boutique's interior security system, the attorney said, that captures a sequence of events prior to what was recorded on the customer's phone. Footage that shows deliberate actions taken by you and 2 other members of staff to remove merchandise from the reach of Mrs. Kane following her entry into the store. Actions that preceded any verbal exchange. He paused. My client's position is that the conduct was premeditated, not reactive. That distinction is significant in terms of the nature of the filing. Vivian's mouth was dry. You're saying it was planned, she said. I'm saying the footage supports that interpretation, the attorney said. What my client says is that the footage speaks for itself. She thought about the green dress. She thought about the moment she had seen Amara Brooks reach for it. She thought about the decision she had made in that moment, the immediate, unconsidered, automatic decision. And she thought about what that automation said about her, about the things she had done so many times they had stopped registering as choices. What does your client want? She asked. My client, the attorney said, wants a very specific thing, Ms. Hartwell. He wants a public accounting, not a settlement, not a letter of apology submitted through corporate channels. He wants you, by name, in a public forum, to account for what occurred in that boutique today. He paused. My client is not a man who benefits from privacy in this matter. He prefers exposure. And if I refuse? Then the personal filing proceeds, along with a formal complaint to the state licensing board regarding the boutique's operating practices, which given the documented pattern... What pattern? She said. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. Another pause, longer. Ms. Hartwell, the attorney said carefully, you have managed Elise Fontaine Couture for 11 years. During that time, there have been 14 formal complaints filed by customers alleging discriminatory treatment. Of those 14 complaints, 11 were resolved internally, without external review or public record. My client's legal team has obtained documentation of all 14. He let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to sit. The pattern is well established. The concrete in front of her windshield blurred slightly. 14 complaints. 11 resolved internally. She knew about those complaints. She had personally resolved most of them. She had written the responses, the careful language, the offers of credit and apology that were designed to resolve things quietly and keep them quiet. She had believed at the time that she was handling them correctly. She had believed at the time that she was protecting the business. She understood, sitting in the parking structure with the engine running and the attorney's voice in her ear, what she had actually been doing. I need to speak with my own attorney, she said. Of course, the attorney said. But Ms. Hartwell, I want to be clear about something. This call is a courtesy. It is the only courtesy my client intends to extend. After today, communications will proceed through formal channels only. I would recommend you use the time accordingly. He ended the call. She sat in the car for a long time. Then she drove home through ordinary afternoon traffic, on ordinary streets, past ordinary buildings. And when she got home, she sat in her driveway without going inside because inside was her life, her furniture, her things, her kitchen, her mirrors. And she was not yet ready to be in the same space as any of it. Her phone was full of messages, from colleagues, from friends, from two numbers she didn't recognize. She didn't open any of them. She could see without opening the social media app that the notification count had reached a number with multiple digits and it was still climbing. She could feel it climbing the way you feel a temperature rising without touching the thermometer. The video was out there. Her face and her voice and her words were out there. And the internet had a very long memory and a very specific kind of appetite for exactly this kind of thing, and there was nothing she could do to recall it. She had made Amara Brooks feel small in a room full of witnesses. And now those witnesses had phones, and now the phones had networks, and Darius Kane had lawyers. And somewhere across the city, in the car or at home, or in whatever quiet space they had returned to, Amara Brooks still had the green dress. Vivian sat in her driveway until the light changed outside, and the afternoon became early evening, and then she went inside, and she sat at her kitchen table, and she did something she had not done in a very long time. She thought about the truth. Not the version of events she would present to an attorney, not the version she would offer to her director or her colleagues, or the court of public opinion that was already, she knew, in the process of rendering its verdict. The actual truth. The version that existed before any framing or language was applied to it. She had seen a black woman walk into her boutique in an ordinary dress, and she had decided, before the woman had spoken a word or touched a single thing, that the woman did not belong there. She had decided it the way she had decided 1,000 similar things over 11 years, without friction, without deliberation, without a moment's awareness that a decision was being made at all. It had not felt like prejudice. It had felt like reading a room, like professional judgment, like the practiced intuition that she had always told herself made her good at her work. She had been wrong about that for a very long time. And the woman she had been wrong about was the wife of the man who owned her building. But that was not, and this was the thing she had to sit with, the hard, specific thing, that was not what made it wrong. It was wrong before she knew who Darius Kane was. It was wrong the moment it happened. It would have been wrong if Amara Brooks had been nobody's wife. If she had driven herself home in her floral dress and cried in the car and never told anyone. If the whole thing had resolved the way things like that usually resolved, quietly and without consequence, and without anyone outside that boutique ever knowing. Vivienne put her elbows on the kitchen table and her face in her hands. The attorney's voice was still in her head. 14 complaints. 11 resolved internally. She sat there in her kitchen in the early evening dark, and she let the truth be the size it actually was. And it was much larger than anything she had built her professional life around, and it pressed against the inside of her chest and would not. The video hit 4 million views before midnight. Amara knew because her phone told her, the way phones tell you things you didn't ask to know, notifications stacking like weight on a surface not built for weight. She had turned the sound off sometime around 7 in the evening, when the calls from numbers she didn't recognize had started coming in faster than she could dismiss them, and she had set the phone face down on the kitchen counter and left it there while she made dinner for her daughter. Her daughter's name was Zora. She was 9 years old, and she had her father's stillness and her mother's eyes. And she was sitting at the kitchen table working through a worksheet on long division with the focused, slightly resentful energy of a person doing a thing they know they have to do, but have not yet found a reason to care about. She did not know what had happened today. She would not know tonight. That was a decision Amara had made in the car on the way home, sitting beside Darius, who was driving with one hand, and had the other hand over hers on the center console, and he had not pushed her on it, because he understood without being told what she needed the rest of this day to look like. Normal. She needed the rest of the day to look normal. So she made pasta. She helped Zora with the long division. She ran a bath and reminded Zora twice about shampoo. She read 2 chapters of the book they were working through together, sitting on the edge of Zora's bed with the lamp on, and her daughter's warm, solid weight against her side. She kissed her forehead and turned out the light and closed the door most of the way Zora liked it. That specific 3-inch gap of corridor light that was not about fear of the dark, but about not being entirely separate from the rest of the house. Then she went back to the kitchen and she picked up her phone. 4 million views. And climbing. She put the phone back down. Darius was in his office at the back of the house. She knew without going there that he was not alone. She had heard voices earlier, low and measured, the particular register of men who speak quietly because they are saying things that should not be heard through walls. She had not gone to listen. She trusted him the way she trusted the foundation of the house, not because she could see it working, but because the structure above it had never given way. She poured herself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard, which was dark and ordinary and still. And she let herself feel, for the first time since the boutique, the full weight of what the day had been. It came in two parts, the way big things do. The first part was anger. She had been carrying it since the moment Vivian Hartwell's hand appeared and took that dress, and she had been carrying it with such practiced efficiency that it had barely made itself visible all day. But now, in the quiet of her kitchen, with the pasta pot drying on the rack, and her daughter asleep down the hall, it arrived completely. The specific quality of being seen as a problem, of having someone look at her and calculate, in under 4 seconds, that she was the wrong kind of person, in the wrong kind of place, and then having that calculation delivered to her face in front of strangers. The thousands of times, before today and through her life, that she had absorbed variations of that calculation and processed them and moved forward and never let them stop her, the energy that had taken, the sustained, invisible, exhausting labor of it. She pressed her fingers against the edge of the counter until she could feel the edge in her fingertips. The second part was something she didn't have a clean word for. Not sadness exactly. Closer to grief, but grief for something she had not lost today, something she had known, on some cellular level, she would never fully have. The version of an ordinary morning where you drove yourself to a beautiful store and reached for a beautiful dress, and no one made a calculation. She stood at the window until the anger and the grief had both moved through her and settled somewhere she could manage them. Then she went to find Darius. The office door was open. He was alone. The men she had heard earlier were gone, and he was sitting behind the desk with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the forearm, and he had a glass of bourbon that he had not touched, and he was looking at something on the desk that turned out, when she got closer, to be a photograph. Their wedding photo. Not framed. Framed copies were in the living room, the hallway, the bedroom. This was a loose print, the kind that lives in a drawer, slightly worn at the edges. She hadn't seen it in years. He looked up when she came in. "Zora down?" he asked. 20 minutes ago. She sat in the chair across from the desk, the one his people used when they sat across from him and had complicated things to report. She had always found it strange to sit in that chair as his wife. Strange in a way she had never quite resolved. "How bad is it?" He set the photograph down. "The lawsuit is filed. Both complaints, corporate and personal." "I know about that." "The video has been picked up by 3 national outlets. As of an hour ago, there's a statement from the State Civil Rights Commission announcing an inquiry into the boutique's historical practices." She absorbed that. 14 complaints, she said. He looked at her. "Frank told me," she said. Frank DeLuca was his attorney, had been for 9 years, and he had the habit of keeping Amara informed on things that touched her life, which she appreciated and which Darius had always allowed because he understood that keeping his wife in the dark about her own affairs was not something she would tolerate. "How long have you known?" "About the complaints?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of evasion, the quiet of precision, of making sure the next thing he said was exactly true. "I knew there was a pattern. I didn't know the specific number until Frank's team pulled the records today." "But you knew." "I knew enough," he said. She nodded, not with satisfaction, with the specific, resigned acknowledgement of someone who has just confirmed a thing they already believed. "So this didn't happen to me by accident. Amara, I'm not saying you planned it. I'm saying that woman had done this before. Enough times that 14 complaints exist. Enough times that 11 of those complaints were buried without consequence." She looked at her hands on the arms of the chair. "She practiced on other women first, and then she practiced on me." Darius said nothing. He was looking at her with the expression he wore when he was letting her arrive somewhere on her own, because he understood that the arriving mattered as much as the destination. "I want to know who those women were," Amara said. "The ones who filed the complaints. The ones whose complaints got buried. Frank can find out." "Then ask him to find out." She met his eyes. "Tonight." He picked up his phone. The next morning came gray and fast. Amara was up before 6, before Zora, before the alarm. She stood in the kitchen in the pre-dawn quiet with her coffee and her phone, and she read. She read the news coverage, which was extensive and was already parsing the story into the particular format that news coverage uses. Timeline, key figures, prior incidents, official response. She read the social media responses, which were massive and various, and contained every human register from genuine outrage to performative outrage to deflection to the specific ugliness that emerges from anonymity. She read the statement from the parent company, which was carefully worded in a way that condemned the incident while attempting to place its full weight on Vivian Hartwell individually, as if individual managers operate in complete institutional isolation, as if the 11 buried complaints had buried themselves. She put the phone face down. At 8:15, Frank DeLuca called. "I have 4 names," he said when she picked up. 4 women who filed complaints that were resolved internally. I have 2 more who may be willing to speak with us but have not yet agreed. All of them experienced incidents at the 5th and Mercer location. Amara was quiet. "One of them," Frank continued, "is a woman named Gloria Reyes. She filed a complaint 3 years ago. The resolution she received was a $200 store credit." He paused. "She's never used it. Can I talk to her?" "She said yes," Frank said. "She's been watching the news since yesterday afternoon. She said, and I'm quoting here, that she has been waiting 3 years for someone to make enough noise that she could add her voice to it without being the only one." Something moved through Amara's chest. "Set it up," she said. By 9 in the morning, she was in a conference room at Frank's office, sitting across a table from a woman named Gloria Reyes, who was 54 years old and had silver at her temples and hands that she kept very still on the table in front of her and eyes that had clearly done a great deal of measuring before this room. They looked at each other for a moment. "She told me," Gloria said without preamble, "that we didn't carry your size." She said it flatly, without heat, the way you say things you have said many times inside your own head. "I was shopping for something to wear to my daughter's law school graduation. I had money in my account. I had a specific amount I was willing to spend. She looked at me and she said, 'We don't carry your size,' and turned away." "Did she know your size?" Amar asked. Gloria looked at her. "She hadn't looked at the rack. She hadn't asked me anything. She looked at me the way your description says she looked at you, and she made the same decision." She paused. "I filed the complaint because I was angry. They sent me a letter 3 weeks later that said they had reviewed my concerns and taken appropriate action and were offering a credit as a gesture of goodwill. I called to ask what appropriate action meant, and they told me it was an internal personnel matter." She pressed her lips together for a moment. $200 of credit for my dignity." Amara looked at her hands on the table. "I want to be in the room," Gloria said. "Whatever happens next, whatever public thing is happening, I want to be in it." "So do I," said another voice from the doorway. And Amara looked up, and there were 2 other women standing there. One about her age, one older, and Frank was behind them making a gesture that communicated that these were the others, the ones who had said yes. They all sat down. What happened over the next 3 hours in that conference room was the kind of conversation that does not have a clean shape in the moment, but reveals its shape later, in memory, in the way things that were separate cohere into something you can finally see whole. 5 women. 5 variations of the same morning. 5 versions of being looked at and found lacking, found wrong, found other, in a space that had been designed and maintained specifically to deliver that verdict to exactly this population with exactly this efficiency, and to do it so smoothly that the verdict felt like the weather. Inevitable, impersonal, nobody's specific fault. By noon, 4 of them had signed on to the lawsuit. The 5th, the older woman, Bet, who was 71 and had filed her complaint 6 years ago and had long since moved past anger into something more like tired certainty, said she wasn't signing anything, but she would give a statement. She would give a statement to whoever needed it, whenever they needed it, and she would give it clearly and in detail, because she was 71 years old and she had no patience left for things that should have been said louder, a long time ago. "Do what you need to do," Bet said, putting on her coat. "I'll be there when you need me." She left. Amara watched her go, and then she turned back to the table, to Frank and the 4 other women and the papers spread between them, and she felt something solidify in her chest. Not resolution exactly. Resolution was something that arrived at the end of things, and this was not the end of anything yet. What she felt was more like foundation, the sense of standing on ground that was real and solid, that other people were standing on with her, that the weight of what she was carrying was no longer hers alone to carry. She thought about Zora doing long division at the kitchen table. She thought about the specific 3-inch gap of corridor light her daughter needed in order to sleep. She thought about the green dress, which was hanging in their bedroom closet at home, still in the boutique's packaging, still unworn. She had not tried it on yet, not because she was afraid to, because she was saving it. She was not yet sure for what, but she was saving it. The call from Vivian Hartwell came at 2:15 in the afternoon. Amara did not expect it. She was in the car, being driven back toward the house, and Frank's name appeared on her screen first. A forwarded call, with a message that said she asked for you specifically. Your call. Amara looked at that message for the length of 3 city blocks. Then she told the driver to pull over. She answered. Vivian's voice was not the voice from yesterday, not the practiced, pleasantly hostile management voice, or the cold certainty of someone who has confused authority with power. This voice was stripped of those things. What remained was something much more elementary, a person who had spent a night sitting with a truth and had not recovered from the sitting. I need to say something to you, Vivian said, not to your husband's attorney, not through corporate channels, to you. Amara looked at the street outside the window, an ordinary street, people walking, a man with a dog, a woman at a crosswalk checking her phone. Say it, Amara said. Vivian took a breath that was audible even through the phone, a rough and uneven breath. I was wrong, she said. Not wrong because of who your husband is. Not wrong because of what's happening now with the lawsuit and the lease and… She stopped. I was wrong the moment you walked through my door. I made a decision about you before you touched anything, before you said a word, and it was a decision I have made many times in that store, and I told myself it was professional judgment, and I told myself it protected the business, and I told myself a lot of things, and none of them were honest. Her voice cracked on the last word, not dramatically, just at the seam of it. I can't undo yesterday. I know that. I'm not calling you to ask you to make this easier for me. I don't deserve easy. I'm calling because I needed you to hear it from my voice, not from a legal document. Amara did not speak. I also need to tell you something else, Vivian said. Something that Frank DeLuca and his team will find it eventually, but you should hear it from me. She paused. The 11 buried complaints. 3 of them were buried because the corporate legal team instructed me to resolve them quietly. Not because I acted alone. The directive came from above my level. I have the emails. The street outside was still ordinary, still just a street. You have the emails, Amar repeated. I have copies, Vivian said. I made copies 8 months ago when there was a different kind of legal review happening at the corporate level, and I started to understand that if anything ever came apart, the structure was designed to land on me specifically. Her voice was flat now, not cold, just stripped down to the bare fact of itself. I was right about that, by the way. I was right that the structure was designed to land on me. I was wrong about what I should have done about it. What do you want for the emails? Amara asked. A long pause. Nothing, Vivian said. I'm sending them to Frank DeLuca this afternoon. I don't want a deal. I don't want reduced exposure. I want… She stopped again, started differently. I want whatever happens next to happen to the right people, not just to me. Amara looked at the man with the dog on the sidewalk outside. The dog was straining at the leash towards something on the ground, something interesting, something the man couldn't see and therefore couldn't understand, and the man was pulling back gently, and neither of them was winning, and it looked like a negotiation that had been going on for a while. I'll have Frank call you, Amara said. Okay, Vivian said. There was a silence between them that was not nothing. It was not forgiveness, and it was not closure, and it was not any of the things that silences in situations like this are sometimes called. It was just 2 women on a phone line who had both just looked at something true. The green dress, Vivian said, very quietly. Amara waited. It'll look… Vivian stopped. I hope you wear it, she said, for whatever that's worth. Amara ended the call. She sat in the car on the pulled-over street for a long moment. Then she told the driver to keep going. The emails arrived at Frank's office at 3:47. By 4:30, he had made 4 calls. By 5, the corporate legal team for the Elise Fontaine Couture parent company, a conglomerate with 17 retail brands and offices in 6 countries, was in emergency session. By 6, Amara's phone showed a missed call from a number registered to the parent company's executive office, which she did not return. By 7 that evening, the landscape of the situation had changed in ways that were structural and irreversible, and Frank called to tell her so. The emails implicate 3 senior executives, he said. They show a documented policy of resolving discrimination complaints below the threshold of public record, dating back further than we knew, further than Vivian knew. His voice had the particular quality of someone who has been a lawyer for a long time and has developed the ability to remain even while saying very uneven things. We're looking at a pattern spanning at least 8 years, multiple locations, probably dozens of incidents that were resolved quietly. Amara was standing in the kitchen again. The same window, the same dark backyard. Zora was at the table again. Homework, a different worksheet, the same focused resentment. "What does this mean for the lawsuit?" she asked. "It means it's significantly larger than it was this morning," Frank said. "It means the 4 women who signed on today are probably the beginning, not the end. It means we are looking at a class action, not an individual complaint." Amara looked at her daughter at the table. Zora looked up. "Mom, what's 7 times 8? 56, Amara said. Zora wrote it down. Looked at the next problem. Looked back up. "Are you okay?" Amara looked at her daughter. 9 years old, her father's stillness, her mother's eyes. A girl who would walk into rooms someday and be looked at and calculated and filed under wrong by people who had practiced the calculation for years on women who came before her. "Yes," Amara said. Zora went back to her worksheet. Amara turned back to the window. "Frank," she said into the phone, "I want to be in the room when they answer for it. Amara, not through lawyers, not through statements. I want to be physically in the room." She pressed her hand flat against the cool of the window glass. "I want to look at the people who made that policy, and I want them to look back at me. All of them. The executives. Not just Vivian." Frank was quiet for a moment. "That's not typically how—" "I know how it's typically done," she said. "I want it done differently." He breathed. "I'll see what I can arrange." "Tonight," she said. "Amara—" "Frank." She turned from the window. "Tonight." Another. Then, "I'll make some calls." She ended the call. She looked across the kitchen at her daughter bent over her worksheet. She looked at the green dress, which she could not see from here but could feel the presence of in the house, the way you feel the presence of something that is waiting to become the thing it was meant to be. Darius appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her face and did not ask what had happened. He could read her the way she read him. Not every word, but the important ones. "How many?" he said. "Frank says it could be dozens," she said. "Different locations. 8 years." His jaw worked once. "Who knew at the executive level?" "3 names so far." He nodded, very slowly. The way he nodded when he was filing things, not in papers but in the internal place where he kept track of what was owed and to whom and in what form the debt should be collected. "I want them in a room," Amara said. He looked at her. "Not your kind of room," she said. And there was something in the way she said it that was not reproach, and not humor, and not apology, but a precise awareness of who they both were, and what they were each capable of, and which kind of capability this moment required. "My kind of room." He looked at her for a long moment. Something passed through his expression, recognition, and something adjacent to pride, and something older than both of those. "Tell me what you need," he said. She took a breath. Outside, the dark backyard was still. Inside, Zora was finishing her worksheet. And somewhere across the city, 3 executives who had spent 8 years building a system designed to keep women like Amara Brooks quiet were sitting in an emergency session, looking at each other across a boardroom table, beginning to understand that the system had. The boardroom was on the 34th floor, and it had the kind of view that was designed to remind you how small everything below you was. Amara had been in rooms like this before. Not many, but enough. Enough to know that the view was not incidental. It was architectural psychology, deliberate and practiced, the physical embodiment of a message delivered to every person who sat in those chairs. You are above things here. Things happen below. Up here, you decide. She walked in at 9 in the morning wearing the emerald dress. She had not planned to wear it. She had laid it out the night before without a clear intention, the way you sometimes reach for the right thing before your mind has finished deciding it's right. She had stood in front of it at 7:30 in the morning while Darius was downstairs making coffee, and Zora was getting dressed for school. And she had looked at it for a long moment, and then she had put it on. Not for the boardroom. Not as a statement or a provocation or a piece of theater. She put it on because her mother's 70th birthday was in 11 days, and she had bought the dress for that, and it fit. And she was not going to let a boutique manager and a corporate policy decide whether she was allowed to wear a thing she had paid for. She had stood in front of the mirror. The dress was exactly what she had known it would be when she first reached for it, through the gap of everything that happened next. The green was deep and certain against her skin. The wrapped bodice sat correctly, the way fabric sits when it was made to account for the actual geometry of an actual body. The slit showed the length of her leg when she moved. She stood in front of the mirror and she did not perform anything to herself, did not talk herself into or out of anything. She just looked. Then she went downstairs and drank her coffee and kissed Zora's forehead and got in the car. Frank was already in the boardroom when she arrived. 3 other attorneys were with him, his associates, young and precise, carrying the flat gray boxes of documentation that had become the physical weight of the last 48 hours. On the other side of the long table sat 4 people. 3 men and 1 woman, all in the particular armor of executive power, tailored clothes, expressions managed into neutral, the specific posture of people who have been trained to sit in difficult rooms without letting their bodies betray the difficulty. These were the 3 executives named in Vivian's emails, plus the company's general counsel, a woman named Patricia Weil, who had the eyes of someone who had spent 30 years in rooms exactly like this one and had developed a comprehensive understanding of what was possible and what wasn't, and exactly where the line between them lived. There was a 5th chair on their side of the table, empty. Amara sat down across from them. She set her bag on the floor beside the chair. She looked at the 4 faces across the table, and she did not perform anything for them either. Not anger, not composure, not the diplomatic warmth that a different kind of meeting might have required. She just looked, the way she had looked at Vivian in the boutique, steadily, from the full height of herself. Frank opened. He was good at openings, economical and precise, laying the factual architecture before anyone could mistake this for a negotiation of values rather than a negotiation of facts. He walked them through the documented incidents. He named the dates and the locations and the nature of the complaints. He named the communications, the emails from 2 of the men sitting across the table, dated over a span of 6 years, directing the quiet resolution of discrimination complaints below the threshold of legal or public record. He placed the printed copies of those emails in front of each of them as he spoke, face up, which was not strictly necessary since they all knew what was in those emails, but which communicated something essential about the nature of this meeting. Everything is already on the table. There is no version of this conversation where these documents do not exist. The man directly across from Amara, his name was Charles Whitmore, and he was the company's North American CEO, and he had silver hair and the particular build of a man who used to play a sport and had kept the frame of it without the muscle, looked at the email in front of him, and then looked up at Amara and said, "I'd like to express on behalf of the company—" "No," Amara said. He stopped. "Not yet," she said. "First, I want to know something." He waited. "How long have you known that Elise Fontaine Couture on 5th and Mercer had a pattern of discriminatory conduct?" She held his gaze. "Not since the emails, before anything was written down." Charles Whitmore looked at Patricia Weil. "I'd advise," Patricia started. "I'm not asking you," Amara said. Not unkindly, just clearly. "I'm asking him." Charles Whitmore looked back at her. Something moved through his expression. Not guilt exactly, because men like Charles Whitmore had systems for managing guilt that were highly developed and largely invisible, but something adjacent to it. Something that lived just underneath the managed neutrality. "There were concerns raised informally," he said, "at the regional management level over the years." "Informal concerns," Amara said. "Yes." "That you were aware of." A pause. "I was made aware of certain concerns, yes." "And the decision to handle those concerns informally, below the threshold of public record, as my attorney put it. Whose decision was that?" Charles Whitmore was quiet. "Mr. Whitmore." Her voice was even. Not soft, just even. "I'm going to be in this room for as long as it takes. I have nowhere else I need to be." It was the same energy she had brought to the velvet chair in the boutique 2 days ago when she had sat and waited with her hands in her lap. The particular patience of a person who has decided that the only move left is patience, and who means it completely. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, "It was a collective decision at the senior leadership level." "Meaning yours," he breathed in. "Among others, yes." The room was very quiet. The view behind them showed the city in morning light, the grid of streets 34 floors below, where ordinary people were doing ordinary things, and the machinery of this meeting was invisible to them, the way machinery usually is until it fails. "I want you to understand something," Amara said. She was not leaning forward. She was sitting exactly as she had been sitting, upright, still, both hands resting loosely on the table. "When I walked into that boutique 2 days ago, I was not thinking about any of this. I was thinking about my mother's birthday, about whether a color would work under a certain kind of lighting. That was the whole scope of my morning." She looked at him steadily. "What happened to me in that store, the way I was looked at, the words that were used, the decision that was made about me before I had done anything except exist in that space. That didn't start with Vivian Hartwell. She was the person who said the words out loud. But the words existed before she said them. The policy that protected her existed before I walked through the door. The 11 buried complaints existed before mine." She paused. "You built the system that made that possible, not in a day, over years, with decisions that were made carefully and documented clearly and filed in places where they wouldn't be found." She looked at the email in front of him. "Until they were found." Charles Whitmore looked at the table. "What do you want?" Patricia Weil asked. Her voice was not hostile. It was professional, which was its own kind of armor, but it was thinner armor than it had been at the start of the meeting. "In terms of resolution." Frank began to answer. Amara put one hand up, briefly, and he stopped. "I want 4 things," Amara said. "Frank will give you the documentation on all of them, and none of them are negotiable." She did not look at Frank. She kept her eyes on the 4 faces across the table. First, a public statement, not a corporate communications product. A statement that names what happened, the pattern of conduct, the policy of suppression, the specific language used against me and against the women who came before me, and that names it accurately. No passive voice, no mistakes were made, names and actions. Patricia Weil's pen moved on her notepad. Second, full settlement for every woman whose complaint was suppressed, not a store credit, a real settlement, individually calculated based on the nature of their experience, reviewed by independent counsel of their choosing. The man to Charles Whitmore's left, younger, with the look of someone who managed finances and measured everything in terms of exposure, made a brief, almost involuntary sound. Amara looked at him. He looked back at her. Third, she said, the 5th and Mercer property. My husband owns the building. The lease is being terminated. I want the space. A pause. Whitmore looked at her. You want the space, she said, for a different purpose, which I will determine, which will not require your input or your approval. Another pause. Longer. And fourth, she said. She was quiet for a moment, and in that moment she looked briefly away from the table and out through the window at the city below. Then she looked back. I want the records. Every suppressed complaint, from every location, going back as far as they exist. Not for the lawsuit, not for public release, for the women who filed them. Some of them filed those complaints years ago and were told it was handled and were never told anything again. She thought of Bet, who was 71 and had the tired certainty of someone who had stopped expecting things to be different. They deserved to know that someone looked at what was done to them and said it was real, even if it's late, even if it's years late. The room was very still. Patricia Weil had stopped writing. Charles Whitmore looked at Amara for a long time. The managed neutrality of his expression had, over the course of the last 40 minutes, done something she recognized. Not collapsed, not broken, but changed. The way something changes when the weight on it becomes too honest to pretend doesn't exist. Ms. Kane, he said, and his voice had also changed, shed something, though she could not have said exactly what. I need you to know that I understand what I'm looking at across this table. And I need you to know... He stopped, pressed his lips together, the gesture of a man doing something unfamiliar with his own face. I need you to know that I am aware that what I'm about to say is not adequate. It is not equal to what happened. I know that. She waited. I'm sorry, he said. It came out plainly, without performance or management, just the words, with the weight of a man who had spent 2 days arriving at them and knew, upon arrival, that they were not enough, and also that they were necessary. Amara looked at him. She thought about Zora's long division worksheet, about the 3-inch gap of corridor light, about her grandmother's voice saying dignity is not about how other people treat you. It's about who you are in the moment they choose to treat you wrong. She thought about Gloria Reyes, who had a $200 store credit she had never used, sitting in her wallet or her drawer or wherever she had put it when she understood that using it would require walking back into the place that had given it to her. She thought about Bet, 71 years old, who would be there when they needed her. I know it's not enough, she said. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because enough is a higher standard than sorry, and I intend to hold you to it. She looked at Frank. Frank opened the first of the gray boxes. The meeting lasted 4 more hours. Vivian Hartwell came to the building on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the day Amara had sat in the velvet chair. She came without attorneys and without appointment. She came to the entrance of what had been Elise Fontaine Couture and stood at the gate, which was up, because there were workers inside now. Painters, contractors, a woman named Rosa, who was overseeing the renovation with the particular focused competence of someone who had been told exactly what the space needed to become and had understood it immediately. The dresses were gone. The display stands were gone. The spotlights had been dismantled and the wiring rerouted. The marble floor was still there. It was beautiful floor and there was no reason to change it, but everything that had lived above it was being remade. Vivian stood at the gate and looked in. She was different, not diminished. Amara had thought about this, about what diminished looked like, and she did not see it. What she saw was someone who had removed a great deal of armor and was learning, at considerable personal cost, how to stand without it. She looked more tired than she had in the boutique. She also looked more real. She did not see Amara at first. Amara was in the back of the space, talking with Rosa about the east wall, which was going to hold shelves, not display shelves, practical shelves, the kind you could reach and touch and use. When she turned and saw Vivian at the gate, she was quiet for a moment. Then she excused herself and walked forward. They stood on opposite sides of the gate threshold. I heard what you asked for, Vivian said. Her voice was steady but careful, the way you speak when you are not yet sure how things will be received. At the meeting, Frank DeLuca's office put out a summary, the 4 things. Amara waited. I wanted to... Vivian stopped, looked at the space behind Amara, at Rosa and the workers and the bare walls and the beautiful marble floor being walked on by people in work boots. What is it going to be? A fashion academy, Amara said, for women who've been told the wrong things about themselves in spaces like this one. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Plus-size women, Amara continued, women of every background, women who want to know how to put themselves together in a way that is theirs, not someone else's idea of what they should look like. She looked at the space. There'll be design courses, styling, basic sewing, access to designers and fabric suppliers, a mentorship component for young women who want to work in fashion but can't afford the programs that exist. She paused. It was actually my daughter's idea, the mentorship part. Vivian looked at her. Your daughter. She's 9, Amara said. She told me that if I was going to do something with the space, it should be something that would still be there when she was grown up. A small thing moved through Amara's expression. Not quite a smile, but adjacent. She's harder to argue with than most adults I know. Vivian breathed. I wanted to ask you something, she said. And I want you to know that whatever you say, I'll accept it. I'm not asking for anything. Amara looked at her. The women whose complaints I buried, Vivian said. The ones from my location. Not the ones that came from corporate directive. I know those are being handled separately. The ones where the directive was mine. Where I made the decision on my own without being told to. She held Amara's gaze. It cost her something visible. I want to apologize to them directly. Not through a lawyer. Not in a document. In person, if they'll have me. And if they won't, if none of them want to be in the same room with me, which I would understand, I want you to tell me what else I can do. Anything that's actually useful. Not for my benefit, just... She stopped. I need to do something with my hands. Something real. Amara looked at her for a long time. Can you teach? She asked. Vivian blinked. Teach what? You managed a luxury boutique for 11 years. You know the industry. The business side of fashion, the sourcing, the client relations, the display mechanics. She watched Vivian's face. We're going to need instructors who actually know the work, not people who know the theory, people who've been in it. Vivian looked at the space behind her again, at the workers and the shelves going up and the marble floor. You would... She stopped. Not for my sake, Amara said, and her voice was not warm exactly, but it was honest, and honesty was its own kind of offering. For theirs, for the women who are going to walk in here and need someone who knows what they're talking about. She paused. You'd start as a consultant. Whether it becomes anything more than that depends on you. Vivian's eyes were wet. She did not let it become crying. She pressed it back, and it was not a pretty press. It was effortful and imperfect. And she looked in that moment genuinely human in a way that she had not been permitted to look, or had not permitted herself to look. In the 20 years of professional identity, she had worn like a suit of clothes. Why? Vivian asked. After everything why would you... Because the women who are going to walk through that door deserve the best instruction available, Amara said. And because... She paused and looked at the space and thought about all the things that had brought her here, the long chain of ordinary mornings and extraordinary ones, her grandmother's voice and Zora's worksheet and the specific 3-inch gap of corridor light. Because I've spent enough of my life letting other people decide who gets to be in a room. I'm not going to do the same thing. Vivian was quiet for a long time. I'll need to talk to the women first, she said, before I agree to anything else. That has to come first. Yes, Amara said. It does. They stood there for another moment, in the opening of the gate, the space behind one of them becoming something new, and the space behind the other one still settling into what it was after the demolition of what it had been. The marble floor ran under both of them, beautiful and indifferent, connecting the inside to the outside the way good floors do. The dress, Vivian said, very quietly. Amara looked at her. It looks the way I thought it would, Vivian said. Amara looked down at the emerald fabric and then back up. She said nothing. There was nothing that needed to be said. She stepped back inside. Gloria Reyes sat across from Vivian Hartwell on a Tuesday afternoon in the conference room of the academy, which was not yet open, was still mid-renovation, with exposed wiring in one corner and the smell of fresh paint coming through from the back. And the two of them were alone because that was what Gloria had asked for when Amara called her. She had said, I want it to be just us. No attorneys, no witnesses, just her and me. Amara had arranged it. She did not know what was said in that room. She had not asked, and Gloria had not offered, and that was correct. Some things are only for the people in them. What she knew was that when Gloria came out 40 minutes later, she walked past Amara in the corridor with her bag over her shoulder, and she paused, and she put her hand briefly on Amara's arm. A small touch, the weight of a sentence. And then she walked out, and her face was not resolved or healed or any of the clean words. But it was different in a way that suggested she had gone into the room carrying something and had come out having set part of it down. That was enough. That was what enough actually looked like, Amara was understanding. Not a conclusion, a direction. Marcus came by on a Wednesday. She didn't expect him. He found the address from the public filing on the property transfer, and he showed up at the gate in civilian clothes. Not a blazer, not the security uniform, just a gray t-shirt and jeans, and he stood there until Rosa noticed him and came to get Amara. He looked younger without the uniform. He also looked less like a person managing something and more like a person being something, which was better. I was fired, he said when she got to the gate. I know, she said. Frank had told her. The boutique's parent company had let all staff go as part of the lease termination, which meant technically no one was fired for cause, which was a distinction that mattered legally and meant nothing practically. I wanted to tell you, he started. You stepped aside, she said. When they told you to escort me out, you stepped aside. He looked at her. Something in his face adjusted. It wasn't enough. No, she said. It wasn't. She held his gaze, but it was something. In a room where nobody else did anything, it was something. He was quiet. "We're hiring," she said. "For the academy. Operations and facilities management. It's not what you were doing before. The pay is different. She paused. "Everything is different." He looked at the space behind her. The renovation, the shelves, Rosa talking to a contractor near the east wall. "Different how?" he asked. "We don't watch people," she said simply. His jaw worked once. He looked at the ground. I was 20-something years old with a scar on his chin and eyes that had been doing something complicated since the first moment she saw him, and she understood that the complication was not confusion. It was conscience, a working conscience in a situation that had not provided adequate room for it, and that was a resource she was not going to waste. "Come in," she said. He came in. The public statement was released on a Friday, which was Amara's choice. Frank had suggested a Tuesday. News cycles, he explained, media strategy, the optimal window for, and she had said Friday, and he had looked at her and then written it down, because he had been her attorney long enough to know when to stop explaining strategy. She read it sitting at the kitchen table before Zora woke up, in the gray early light, with her coffee. It was not what Charles Whitmore's communications team had initially drafted. That version had been returned twice with Frank's annotations in red, which had been considerable. What came back on the third pass was plain enough. Not perfect. The corporate voice was still present in the syntax, the careful arrangement of sentences to convey accountability without excess exposure. But the essential facts were there, named clearly. The pattern, the policy, the years, the women. Her name was there. The names of the women who had agreed to be named were there. She read it twice. Then she put the phone down and looked at her coffee going cold. She thought about the morning of the boutique, the floral wrap dress she had bought on clearance, and the parking structure, and the lipstick she had decided was fine, and then decided wasn't. The ordinary quality of a morning that becomes something else, permanently, without asking your permission. She thought about what she would have done if Darius had not answered on the second ring. She had thought about this before. She had thought about the version of that day where she made the phone call and he didn't pick up, or where she didn't make the call at all, where she stood up from the velvet chair and walked past Marcus and out through the gate and into the mall and back to her car and drove home and sat in the driveway and decided, as women in her position often decide, that the cost of pursuing it was too high. She thought about what that day would have been, unremarkable in the registry of similar days, unrecorded, resolved quietly, as 11 others had been before it. She thought about Gloria Reyes' $200 store credit. She picked up her phone and called her mother. Her mother picked up on the third ring, sounding the way she always sounded in the morning. Alert but cautious. The caution of someone who had learned over 70 years that the phone ringing early could be several kinds of news. "It's just me," Amara said, a breath of relief audible even through the phone. "What time is it?" "Early, I know. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. I'm always up." Her mother paused. "How are you?" I've been watching everything. I didn't want to call until I didn't know when was a good time." Amara looked at the kitchen, at the pasta pot still on the rack from Tuesday, at Zora's most recent worksheet on the edge of the table with the teacher's green checkmark at the top. "Now is a good time," she said. Her mother was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" She thought about how to answer that honestly. "I feel like I've been carrying something very heavy for a long time," she said, "and I've put some of it down. Not all of it, just some." "That's enough for today," her mother said. "Yeah," Amara said, "I think so." They talked for 20 minutes, about nothing important, about the birthday dinner, about Zora, about a plant her mother had bought and was not sure how to keep alive, about ordinary things. The ordinary things felt different than they had before. Not better exactly, but more specific, more present. The way things feel when you have recently been reminded how far from ordinary they are. When she hung up, Zora was standing in the kitchen doorway in pajamas, with her hair in the state it always achieved overnight, a state that defied physics in directions that were both impressive and intractable. "Were you on the phone?" Zora asked. "With Grandma." "Why so early?" "Because I wanted to hear her voice." Amara stood up. "Come here." Zora came. Amara pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than the typical morning hug, and Zora accepted it with the particular grace of a 9-year-old who does not fully understand what she is accepting, but understands that it is real and therefore allows it, and she put her arms around her mother's waist and leaned in. "Mom," Zora said, her voice muffled by the fabric of Amara's robe. "Yeah." "Can we have pancakes?" Amara laughed. It came out whole, not forced. The first whole laugh in what felt like a very long week. "Yes," she said. "We can have pancakes." She let go and went to find the flour. The academy opened on a morning in late spring when the light had that particular quality of early warm weather. Generous, clear, the kind of light that is doing its job without showing off. The gate was open wide and the marble floor was clean, and the shelves along the east wall were full of fabric samples in colors that ranged from the quiet to the extravagant. There were tables with sewing machines, real machines, industrial grade, donated by a supplier. Frank had tracked down through 3 intermediaries who all ultimately connected to Darius, though the donation was listed under a different name, which was how Darius preferred things that involved his wife's work. He had opinions about where his name belonged, and most of those opinions were quiet, which she had come to understand over 15 years of marriage, was itself a form of love. Gloria Reyes was there. She came with her daughter, who was a lawyer now, had been a lawyer for 3 years, and who had learned about her mother's complaint only in the last month, and had taken the news with the specific combination of rage and sorrow that belongs to adult children learning things they wish they had been able to fix. Gloria introduced her daughter to Amara, and Amara shook her hand, and the daughter held on 1 beat longer than a standard handshake. "Thank you," the daughter said. "Your mother was already in it," Amara said. "She was waiting for company." Bet was there, in the chair nearest the windows, with the straight spine and the tired certainty that had not changed and perhaps never would. She was talking to Marcus, who was in a staff shirt now, who had turned out to be excellent at the operations management work, in the way that people sometimes surprise you when the room they're in finally fits them. He was listening to Bet with real attention, and Bet was saying something that made him nod slowly, and Amara did not hear what it was. Diana Marsh was there, the silver-haired woman from the boutique, the one in the camel coat, who had stepped forward and said, "I saw everything," and had said it without hesitation and without anything to gain from it. She had reached out to Frank's office a week after the meeting. She had said she wanted to be involved, if there was something to be involved in. She was now on the Academy's advisory board, which was 3 people and a working draft of a mission statement, and she brought to it the particular usefulness of someone who understood the industry from the inside and had grown, at 65, deeply tired of the inside. Vivienne was there. She stood near the back of the room, not quite at the edge of things, but not at the center of them. She was wearing clothes that were different from what she had worn in the boutique, less architecture, less performance of authority. She looked like a person trying to figure out where to put her hands in a room she was still learning to be in, which was accurate and which was at least honest. Amara's mother arrived at 10:30, 30 minutes after the official opening time, because she was always 30 minutes after any time ever given to her, which was one of the most consistent and beloved and maddening facts about her. She came through the gate in a blue dress and immediately said, loudly enough for the whole room, "This floor is beautiful. Whose idea was this floor?" And several people laughed, and someone pointed to Amara, and her mother looked at her across the room with the expression that had been the central fact of Amara's life since before she could remember. The look that said, "You, of all people, I am not surprised by anything you do, and I will love you for every bit of it." Amara crossed the room. Her mother took both her hands. She looked at the green dress. Amara was wearing it again, would wear it to the birthday dinner in 3 days, was wearing it today because today seemed like the day it was for, and her mother looked at it the way you look at something that's right. "Good color," her mother said. "That's what I thought," Amara said. Her mother held her hands and looked around the room. At the light on the marble floor and the fabric on the shelves and the women talking and the machines waiting and the east wall with its shelves where dresses had once lived on their individual stands under their individual spotlights, one version of what beauty looked like in one particular curated space, replaced now by something wider and less controlled and more true. "Your grandmother would have," her mother started. "I know," Amara said. They stood there together in the morning light, holding hands the way they had when Amara was small enough that holding hands was the most ordinary thing in the world, and they did not say anything else because there was nothing else that needed to be said. Darius arrived at 11. He came alone, which she had asked him to, not because she was ashamed of him or wanted the day to be separate from him, but because the day was hers and she had wanted to walk through the beginning of it on her own terms, in the same way she had driven herself to the boutique that morning, alone, without the detail, because she was 38 years old and she had been doing ordinary and extraordinary things alone her whole life before she met him, and she was not going to stop now. He came through the gate and found her near the windows, and he put his arm around her without announcement, and she leaned into him for a moment, briefly, the specific brief lean that meant, "I'm glad you're here." He looked at the room, the full room, everyone in it. "Good," he said quietly. She looked up at him. "Good," she agreed. He watched Bet talking to a young woman who had come in off the street, drawn by the open gate, drawn by some quality of the space that she had hesitated at the threshold for almost 5 minutes before coming in. He watched Marcus navigating between a group of women near the sewing machines with the ease of someone finding their rhythm. He watched Diana Marsh explain something to Amara's mother with her hands, some point about fabric or design, her hands moving in the specific language of people who love a subject. He watched Vivian in the back of the room. Amara watched him watch her. He was quiet for a long moment. She did not fill the quiet. "She came," he said. "She came," Amara said. He breathed slowly, in, out. The breath of a man making room for something he had not fully made room for yet. "That took something," he said. And he did not say it to mean it was enough, or to mean it changed anything, or to mean she deserved credit that outweighed the debt. He said it the way you note a fact, a thing that is true. "Yes," Amara said. "It did." He looked at her. The same look he had given her in the boutique, crouching down to her eye level, reading her face for the things she wouldn't want named in front of strangers. He read it now. Not for damage, not for what needed fixing. Just for her. For the specific quality of who she was in this moment, in this room, in this light. "How are you?" he asked. The same question from that day, in the boutique, before any of it had finished being what it was going to be. She thought about it honestly, the way she had thought about it honestly, when her mother asked the same question that morning. "I feel like I put something down," she said, and picked up something else. She looked at the room, the women, and the machines, and the light, and the floor. "I don't have a word for what I picked up yet." He nodded. "You will," he said. "Probably," she said. Outside, the late spring morning was doing what late spring mornings do, being itself, neither dramatic nor withheld, just the weather and the light and the particular temperature that made people walking past an open gate slow down slightly, unconsciously, as if something warm were coming from inside, which it was. 3 women came through the gate in the next half hour, separately, drawn by nothing more specific than the open door and the sound of people and the quality of the light through the windows. They stood at the threshold, each of them, for a moment, the brief still moment that belongs to anyone considering whether they belong in a space they have not been invited to, and then they came in. No one asked them what they were looking for. No one assessed their clothes or their size or the specific arithmetic of how they looked. Rosa smiled and said, "Welcome." Marcus said, "Can I get you anything?" Diana Marsh said that the fabric on the 3rd shelf was something remarkable, and did they want to feel it? They felt it. The day moved forward the way days do when they are the right kind of day. Not perfectly, not without friction, not without the small breakdowns and misunderstandings and logistical imperfections that belong to anything new and real. The coffee ran out too fast. 2 of the sewing machines needed adjustment. A shelf bracket had been installed at the wrong height and needed to come down. None of it stopped anything. Late in the afternoon, when the light was going golden, and most of the guests had filtered out, and the room was quieter, Amara stood alone in the center of the marble floor. The fabric was on the shelves, and the machines were at the tables, and the east wall had everything on it that was supposed to be there. The gate was still open. The corridor beyond was ordinary, people passing without stopping. She looked at the space. She thought about the woman who had stood in this space before, in a different configuration of the same room, and had decided in under 4 seconds what kind of person Amara was. She did not think about it with anger anymore. The anger had done what anger does when you give it somewhere real to go. It had become motion. It had become this room. It had become the shelves and the machines and the women who had walked through the gate today and the ones who would walk through it tomorrow and the ones who would walk through it years from now, long after today, had become a thing that happened rather than a thing that was happening. She thought about her grandmother's sentence, the one she had heard so many times it had gone from language to sound and back to language again. Dignity is not about how other people treat you. It's about who you are in the moment they choose to treat you wrong. She had been that in the boutique. She had been exactly that, not without cost, not without the deep specific bruise of it, but present and steady and herself, even in the velvet chair, even with Vivian standing over her, even in a room full of strangers who had elected to watch rather than speak. She had been that. And then she had been this. She felt Darius behind her before she heard him. The specific gravity of him in a room, the way the air arranged itself differently when he was near. He put his hands on her shoulders from behind, not pulling her back, just present. The weight of his hands, solid and warm and actual. She reached up and put one of her own hands over one of his. They stood like that for a moment, looking at the room that used to be something else, in the light that was almost gone now, on the floor that was beautiful and unchanged. "Same time tomorrow?" he said. She laughed. Small, true. "The construction crew is coming at 8. "I'll make coffee," he said. "You don't know how to make coffee." "I'll make an attempt at coffee," he said. She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. Outside, through the open gate, the evening was arriving the way evenings arrive at the end of days that have been long and real. Not with drama, not with announcement, just the slow, reliable shift of light to something darker and quieter. The city settling into its night version of itself, ordinary and ongoing, all the lives inside it continuing their particular directions, unaware of and unconcerned with this specific room on this specific evening, and the two people in it and the thing that the room had become, which was fine.